Now we're at this point where we're sort of moving our network, bringing it onto Mainnet, going to launch a token, and now sort of seriously think about scaling this network. And the idea here is refine this process in India, and then of course expand to as many developing countries as possible, because basically there are about 3.5 billion people in the world who face exactly the same problem. So if we can solve it here in India, the most competitive market, we sure as shit can solve it anywhere else.
I think one of the aspects of crypto that people have always praised and found noteworthy about it is that these businesses' networks are often global from day one. You know, Bitcoin is a global network. Ethereum started as a global network. Do you think that's uniquely different for Deepin? I.e., do you think location and geography are a more important organizing principle for Deepin type networks versus maybe more traditional L1 or pure software type networks?
There was a chart on your Explorer that showed like obviously where the hotspots are deployed, which is all in India, but also the location or the rough location of the owners of those hotspots. And that's a global map. There's people in the US, there's people in Europe that are buying and financing the hotspots that are then deployed by experts in areas of India where there's like a lot of demand. So I think that model makes sense. I think more Deepin should allow for kind of basically like foreign investment or decoupling hotspot owner and hotspot deployer.
Love the banner behind you. Is that are you guys in the office?
Yeah, this is a little set we have in the office that we're starting to use to make more videos and content and podcasts and that sort of thing.
That's awesome to hear. And it feels like there's a number of people accelerating content creation in the space. And honestly, Connor and I see on the media side, distribution is starting to get a lot better for Deepin's type stuff as well. So we're pretty excited to see proliferation of high quality content sort of explode over the next year as Deepin hopefully kind of starts exploding more. I think the setup you have there is actually fantastic. I might get myself a little EV3 poster for my background for next time too. You know, a question that I love to start with at the end of the day is, what historical or fictional character do you think you're most similar to and why?
So I don't think I could name a figure, but maybe this is instructive. This is going to be a little bit of a tangent, so I had this vivid dream about 2 years ago or so, right? So imagine, so there are two co-founders to Dabba, myself and Shubhendu. I had this dream that we were just one step slightly better than cavemen, right? So we're all living in this small village, you know, no metal work or anything meaningful as yet, hunter-gatherer settlement and that sort of thing. And I remember vividly, Shubes and I were trying to convince the village that, hey, instead of getting our meat from this one guy that's this great hunter that, you know, goes out and gets the meat, right up like the road from where our village is, there's this amazing cliff with this ravine where all of the herd goes through at this particular time. And if we all got together and stood up there with boulders, we could take out the entire herd and all of us would have enough meat for the entire season. You know, I have no idea what that means in reality, but historically, if you ask me, I think that's what I relate to.
Fair enough. I mean, dreams have been said to have incredible and context heavy meaning for real life. What do you think your dream means? Do you want to interpret it for us a little bit?
I got nothing. The only thing I come away from that is not so much an intellectual response as a very visceral survive and fight and win sort of thing is what it's left me with. I think that's what I come away from the interpretation of that need to get everyone together and do something that makes a giant impact versus sort of hoping to live on one threadbare thing. I think that's a very visceral thing.
Yeah, I think there's a collaboration analogy in there too.
Oh, for sure. Like Shubes and I have been working together for 15 years, so I think that's deeply embedded.
Sounds like decentralization of the supply chain, or as Mahesh tweeted the other day, Deepin turns communities into productive supply chains. Sounds like what's going on there.
And like all of I love the little symbolism and subtlety in that of there's this cliff that we all have to climb. There's a ravine. There's a choke point for the entire herd, how we're going to do it. So I think a lot of startup pitching and learning and all of that sort of went into the structuring of that dream subconsciously.
Man is dreaming about Deepin. That's a founder I like to see. Well, man, look, we're really excited to have you on here today. And the dream was very interesting. You know, one of the questions that I had when I was kind of researching your project and spending some time learning about what you do was the name. Dabbas are obviously sort of small sellers in India. But I would love it if you could tell us a little bit more about kind of where the name comes from and then kind of what like the masala chai branding might be as well. Because you guys have gone after the branding side of this in a very interesting way.
Yeah, thanks. The branding's evolved, but it's really a sort of nod to what our roots are and what the product really is. So you're right. Dabba has sort of two meanings, mostly in Hindi. I think most languages in India, Dabba will mean roughly the same thing. But in Hindi, one is sort of, yes, the famous Dabbawalas of Mumbai that transport food and that sort of thing before DoorDash and all of these things existed. But colloquially, Dabba means box, right? And so everyone refers to their Wi-Fi box as like a Wi-Fi box, right? So Wi-Fi Dabba was the original thing, and then we sort of dropped the Wi-Fi, and it's just Dabba because we're going to build more and more functionality into the devices. Like I can talk about this later, but our routers come built in with apps, and there's a whole platform layer on top of this. So the etymology is basically Wi-Fi box. The second bit of it is slightly more in terms of the cultural nuance of setting expectations of the product for the consumer. So the other meaning that Dabba has is, okay, it's just good enough. It just about works. It's fast, it's cheap, right? It's not the best thing out there, but it's what works, especially in the kind of growing economy culture. And that it sort of goes with the word jugaad. And if you look at that triangle of, three things, pick two, like fast, cheap, reliable, we've chosen fast and cheap. And as we grow, we'll make it a hell of a lot more reliable. So the name Dabba sort of signifies that. It's very, like if you tell any Indian what is Dabba, they'll get that instantly.
It was very interesting to me, I think, in the context of the informal economy in India, because, there's 1.5 billion people. Most of those people aren't organized through a traditional economy. They're kind of just getting by or doing odd jobs here and there in order to make ends meet. And, passive income, alternative income is such a big way that people in India actually get by. So it made a lot of sense to me in the context of what you guys were doing in terms of creating crowdsourced capabilities for a lot of just basic resources. And we'll get into that in a second. But, before that, I want to spend a minute on India. It's an up and coming powerhouse. It's where my family's from, obviously. It seems like it's where you've spent a lot of your career and time, at least on the building side. There's a massive population, very young population as well that's ready to work. Would love it if you could give us maybe a quick compare and contrast of what India looks like versus the US today at a high level, and then how you think about crypto adoption across both countries, because obviously there's been a good amount of regulatory red tape in India. So how you're dealing with that too would be pretty informative.
Yeah, for sure. So I think a great way to think about India is we're a very slow and steady rise. I wouldn't say slow. Actually, I'd say like reasonably paced, growing at about 5-6% year on year for pretty much the last decade. And of course, with the future being distributed unevenly, places like Bangalore, Mumbai, Chennai, the metros grow at 20% year on year, that sort of thing. So we've started from this base where for the next 20 years, there's a sense of inevitability in the feeling of the population of the country. Because for one, demographics are on our side, right? Like, as you mentioned, there are something like 700 million Indians that are under the age of 35, but it's still extraordinarily young population. There's a sense of the generation that's grown up in the last 20, 30 years has seen nothing but growth. And so they've got that air of inevitability that tomorrow is definitely going to be better than today. And they've got the long-term view for it. So in that sense, if you compare and contrast sort of where the two economies are, the US, of course, is at the top and continues to do well because it's got such a giant magnitude of an advantage over the last 50 years. But if you were to nail the next up and coming that was reliable, stable, and is actually going to get there because it has a right amount of capitalism chasing, the right amount of economic controls, and sort of the right amount of, what's the best way to put it? Wisdom that the government has to take things step by step, regardless of sort of the local things that happen. So in that sense, crypto adoption, for example, the second highest number of wallet users apart from the US is India. Crypto adoption in India is massive because, again, it comes back to our informal economy. To give you a sense of scale of what the informal economy in India looks like, less than 5% of the country pays income tax, right? So every skyscraper, every road, every infrastructure is paid for less than 5% of the country. So crypto is this thing that the country is incredibly familiar with. Yes, there's a level of, I wouldn't say uncertainty, but the government is waiting patiently to see how it plays out in the US, Europe, and that sort of thing. And then they'll draft a sensible sort of set of regulation around that. Right now, it's a very sort of light hands. Let's see how it goes. Don't step out of line and then we'll come after you sort of thing. And I think the first generation of crypto projects were concerning in a lot of ways because it was just an exercise of creating sort of value, moving it around, but nothing that sort of meaningfully tied utility in a way that was felt by real people. So if you have the next set of projects like Deepin projects and things that are coming online now, where we're able to demonstrate to the government that it is a stable thing, there's a KYC, there's regulation, it's providing actual utility to the people that need it, and all of that sort of thing, their attitude's going to be very different. So I think it's just an exercise of give it 5 years, the landscape will look wildly different.
But do you think it's like the US insofar as the relationship between business and government? I mean, one of the things that always struck me about the US is, the classic Uber story of you can break a bunch of rules along the way if you're genuinely at the end of the day trying to create societal value. But there's this question in India if it's even possible to build a crypto business. I mean, we're looking around and wondering why there aren't more. Do you think there's a difference in terms of the underlying use case? Because, with something like what you guys are doing, there's very clearly a social benefit to it. Governments can see it, people can see it. Maybe with DeFi, that's not necessarily as easily understood, especially because obviously India has, the India stack and the unified payments interface. Do you differentiate in terms of the actual business itself in terms of India's receptivity?
No, I'd say your initial premise of how you sort of stated how things would work in the US and especially in the context of Uber worked well here. It broke the same set of rules. It was useful to everybody and it was accepted. Same with gig and delivery workers. My God, the number of food delivery workers we have in the city is insane. Like the running joke in Bangalore is software developers sit for 2 hours in traffic to come to the office and build 10-minute grocery delivery apps, right? And they're breaking rules left, right, and center to make this happen. But it's useful to people, so it will sort of become part of the mainstream. So the moment you have crypto projects that genuinely provide measurable utility on a day-to-day basis, when it falls into the need to have and not the nice to have, where most things are right now, regulation and everyone's perceptions will evolve. I honestly believe it's just a question of time. And the teams are there. Like, we're going to the Solana Hacker House, I think tomorrow and day after, for example. There's an entire generation of young Indian devs who are not starting off with Node.js and React and that sort of thing, right? They go straight to making on-chain programs and that sort of thing. So give that ecosystem a little bit more time for them to learn and start experimenting. And again, back to that scale. Do you know how many millions of developers that are coming online in India sort of pretty much every year, right? So it'll work out.
Yeah, we're hoping the power goes to the people at the end of the day and what the people want the government starts to allow. But it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about the state of wireless networks today in India. I mean, who owns them? How are they regulated? It feels like when I read the news or I look around, it's maybe a small group of people today.
Yeah, for sure. So India is pretty much like the rest of the world, almost when it comes to how telecom is owned. Pretty much in every country in the world, you have 2, maybe 3 providers that sort of monopolize the entire market. India is a little interesting in the sense that, yes, there are 2 large providers in the market, but we've just sort of started this journey of connectivity to India because of the scale that we have. So to give you a sense of things, about 15 years ago, there were about 15 telecom providers in the country, right? And over the last decade and a half, that aggregation, consolidation, the weak have fallen off, and you sort of ended with this system where you have sort of 2 providers. But even these 2 providers, with 800 million subscribers, have only scratched 50% of the mobile market, right? So even the 2 providers have another 800 million customers to bring on 4G and 5G, right? So that's just on the telecom side. On the other side of the equation, you've got broadband, which because this telecom growth has been happening, broadband has sort of been left entirely by the wayside, right? Whereas now there's this mad build out that's going to happen, quite simply because the telecom networks are now choked, right? Because this is an exercise in physics. You can only install so many 4G and 5G towers. You saturate the airwaves, and then that's it. You can't plonk more towers in there. Yes, there's 5G, and I'll get to how that works in small cells, and we've got ideas, and there are things happening there and all of that. But the broad principle is you can't put out more towers. So in order to start figuring out things like offload, in order to start providing more connectivity, in a country of 1.5 billion people, there are only 30 million broadband connections, right? To give you a sense of scale, the US has about 120 million connections. China has close to 700 million connections, right? So India's this giant greenfield market where now there's this mad race where in the next decade, you're going to see 400 million broadband connections rolled out at the minimum. So that's where we're at about now.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. The scale of the opportunity is something that always interested me about India, because obviously GDP per capita is still extremely low, but the growth rate is just amazing. And, when a middle class gets created out of nowhere, that's generally where economic prosperity comes from at scale.
Yeah. And I just want to jump in on that sense of growth, right? So why is this build out happening and what's with the telcos and all of that? So think about this, right? We already have the most competitive telecom market in the world. Apart from China, we have the most number of customers. We're number 2, but we also have the cheapest data rates already. And our Indian consumers already consume the highest amount of data per capita per customer in the world. Like the amount of data consumption tripled over the last 5 years. This year, it's going to double once again on its own, right? It's this Moore's law of things. And the interesting thing is, again, the nuances of culture and that sort of thing seem to play a surprising role over here, because in India, because many people speak different languages, video consumption is a huge thing because of cross-cultural communication, not so much reading things. So consumption is automatically higher because video is higher. And then take the national sport. Like a cricket match is an all-day thing, right? So anyone who streams is not streaming a 2-hour basketball game or that sort of thing, right? They're streaming an 8-hour cricket match. So just naturally the way that our content creation, consumption, and that sort of thing is structured culturally, we're sort of geared to more data consumption as time goes on.
Yeah, it sounds like the market's pretty unique, both in terms of the growth potential and also like you said, the content consumption, like trends or habits or practices of most Indian people. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I want to talk about Dabba now a bit more. I first heard about you guys last cycle, so maybe 2020, 2021, kind of in conjunction with Helium, when Helium was creating this like DY category that turned into DePIN as we know it today. But would love to just get a quick kind of overview from you of the last 7 years of building Dabba, like how you got started and kind of the progress you've made till now.
So my co-founder Shubs and I used to run a software consulting company where we did logistics software for a very specialized set of firms. These logistics firms only transported high value items like gold, jewelry, human organs, and that sort of thing. So we built their software that tracked when you need to move a heart from one place to another for a transplant, right? Or they did this amazing project with the UN, where the UN wanted to collect something like 17.5 million blood samples across the country. And so you have a turnaround time, right? Because the blood can't go anywhere, not like e-commerce, right? There's no such thing as a lost package, right? You don't get to ship $1 million worth of jewelry to the wrong person, things along those lines. So we had this team of about 10 engineers. We've been running this company for a solid 5-6 years. And one of the traditions that we had was we'd go to our neighborhood tea stall, right? That's a nod to our thing. And it was just down the road from our office. And we'd sort of have our stand-up meetings there. And because we were in this sort of critical business, the entire team was on call 24/7. So in 2017, 4G hadn't even launched in India, right? It was 3G. So we wanted connectivity because we'd end up spending an hour at the tea stall, just having the meeting, and everyone would have their laptop out and things like that. So we got a broadband router, installed it in this tea stall, and started using it. Really, really quickly, all the other customers in the stall wanted to start accessing it. We decided then we'd love to share it with everyone, but we were going to charge for it because at the very least, it's got to pay for itself because the cost of the router, cost of the connection. And the second thing is we've learned the hard way over the last 15 years. The best way to measure something is if someone's actually willing to pay for it, right? So we charged a very reasonable fee and people would use it. Within a week of that, the entire street of stores were like, I want this too, because they saw customers hanging out more, it created buzz, that sort of thing. Also, personally, on the other side, on our logistics side, we felt the need for this connectivity in ways that we had never recognized earlier, right? Where we would have the situation where a truck would leave the warehouse at 9 a.m, carrying $6 million worth of jewelry. It would go around the entire city. Nobody knows where this thing is. And it would hopefully come back at the end of the day and that sort of thing, right? So we were trying to solve hardware within the truck, beaconing locations, all of these things were sort of happening in parallel. And then we realized, okay, here was this giant opportunity to do something about it. And, we had always wanted to run a product company, not a services company. And at that time, we realized sort of this thing, okay, this is something where we want to do because we saw the immediate impact that it had. So we sold to our biggest client. We applied to Y Combinator. We raised a little bit of money and we quickly expanded to 1,000 locations across Bangalore by the end of 2017, early 2018. The system that we followed was we would go and sell retail locations and that sort of thing, saying, hey, we want to install Wi-Fi, your customers can use it. And we would catch all of the local ISPs who service that area and ask them to do the actual connecting. Just a small tangent here. In India, the hilarious thing is in broadband, it's actually hundreds of thousands of tiny, what used to be cable TV operators that are now mini ISPs. So broadband is an insanely fragmented market, but I'll touch that in a minute. That naturally led to this conflict where we would have this situation where we would sell an entire neighborhood, like 150 stores, say, we're going to do this public Wi-Fi network, it's going to be amazing, all of that. And our ISP partner would come to us and be like, yo, I don't have enough bandwidth to bring it to this location. And when we looked into the root cause of the problem, we realized that the underlying infrastructure in India had not caught up to the growth. Like take Bangalore, our hometown, right? It's grown from 1 million people to practically 20 million people in 20 years, almost, right? It's exploded. It's unrecognized. That's the kind of growth that's happening in this country. And of course, in India, nothing grows with actual utility and planning, right? So there's no fiber optic cables under the streets and that sort of thing. So as ISPs are trying to expand networks, it's crazy expensive because they dig a trench and lay fiber. The next day, the roadworks group comes and digs up the trench. The next day, the water people come, right? So it's pure chaos. And so at that time, we were also powering Google's public Wi-Fi, parts of it. So it would say Google Wi-Fi, but it would be our infrastructure under it because we have the best connectivity relationships, operations team, all of that sort of stuff. Then the guys at Google introduced us to the people at Google X, and we saw their Loon project, right? And I know you guys have talked to the XNet folks and you know a lot about this. So that always struck me as a slightly insane thing. But what really interested me about that project was they were using lasers to communicate between the balloons. So it was a 4G signal coming from the balloon, but a laser between the balloons. Laser is epic, right? You can do 10 gigabits, 20 gigabits a second, super reliable, blah, blah, blah. So we got in touch with that team. And I think we were the biggest rollout of the Google laser for a solid 2 years, like 2018, 2019. We had almost, I think, 15 of them, dozen of them, something like that, running across Bangalore, all weather conditions, right? Tested it over 2 solid years, serving tens of thousands of live customers and all of that jazz. At that point, the only issue that we had was we needed Google to lower the price of the laser. It was very useful for building it, but it was tens of thousands of dollars per unit. And we were trying to explain to them, listen, man, that's not going to fly with our economics and that sort of thing, right? No crypto, nothing at this point. I'll come to that later. This is a solidly Web 2 Y Combinator innovative, but in a very traditional way sort of thing. So we were like, guys, no way we can pay this kind of money to roll out this network. It makes no sense. We're a low-cost, Dabba, fast, cheap, young people, all of that sort of thing. So they weren't willing to lower the price of their product because they had this pipe dream that they would sell these things to telcos because they were under the impression that telcos would use it to fill gaps in the network. So let's say you're a big telco and there's a river, right? You can't put a cable under the river. It's too expensive. So yeah, the laser will do it. They have tried for 7 years. I don't know what they're up to, but basically, long story short, we said we'd build our own laser and we'd do it faster and cheaper. And you'll see our new laser come online in the next couple of months. And it's a magnitude of order cheaper and it's way cooler. And I'm very excited, but unveil that later. Anyway, around this time, so we had this network, we had thousands of customers, operationally profitable, paid network, no free Wi-Fi for anyone. This thing's paying for itself, except it was impossible for us to raise money. Any VC we went to would be like, man, the big telco is going to kill you. You guys are amazing. You guys are good. Even the guys at Google and former like VCs here who used to work at Google, they'd be like, dude, just sell your company and move on. Like you're going to get crushed, right? But for us, the on-ground reality was something different. We knew we had a profitable product. We knew we had a great service, all of that sort of thing. So never made sense. But the one interesting thing was every single day of the week, somebody in the company would get a call or an email or something from someone going, I love what you're doing. Can you bring it to my area? Do you have a franchisee? Like, how can I get involved in this, right? And so we said, cool. Around 2020 or so, in the middle of the pandemic or beginning thereabouts, we were like, let's see if the public is willing to put their money where their mouth is because we need to scale this network. So we did this little experiment where we divided the city of Bangalore into 100 hexes. They were actually squares. We didn't know that hexes were cooler at that time because, again, nothing about crypto, right? And so you would pay $20,000 and you would sort of get a share of the revenue from whatever connections were in your hex. And when we contacted people around the world to see if they would be interested in it, and these are mostly engineers working at Netflix, Google, Apple, and that sort of thing, right? People have gotten in touch with us. Everyone would tell us, hey, man, have you heard of this thing called Helium? Helium this, Helium that, crypto, what? Like, so while talking to these people, we're like, oh, okay, what is this thing? And then eventually someone got us in touch with the folks at Helium, and we learned, oh, okay, so there's a scalable, better, smoother way to do all of these sorts of things. So 2021, 22-ish is when we started talking to the folks at Helium, spoke to the folks at Multicoin, raised a little bit of money. It took us a solid year and a half to grasp tokenomics and the subtleties of that sort of thing. And now we're at this point where we're sort of moving our network, bringing it onto mainnet, going to launch a token, and now sort of seriously think about scaling this network. And the idea here is refine this process in India and then, of course, expand to as many developing countries as possible, because basically there are about 3.5 billion people in the world who face exactly the same problem. So if we can solve it here in India, the most competitive market, we sure as shit can solve it anywhere else. But yeah, that's sort of last 7 years.
That's super cool to hear the whole story, kind of all the learning and different things you tried along the way. Lots of overlap with other DY projects too, like both like the XNet founders and Project Loon, and also like the Helium kind of team, obviously in 2020, 2021. Yeah, I think, like I said before, that's where I first heard of you guys, was in the context of like a potential Helium SubDAO or just like another DY project that the Helium team was kind of involved with or talking to. Obviously, you guys share a big investor in Multicoin. I mean, it sounds like you're going to launch as your own project, own token, but you know, whatever happened to the considering launching as a Helium SubDAO? Like, what were the considerations that went into saying yes to that, saying no to that? Because obviously they have a new HIP, kind of a new vision for their project recently with HIP 128, which is basically, you know, we're not just a wireless project. We're going to be a network of kind of Deepin networks, and we're going to have Sourceful, which is an energy project, join as a SubDAO. Obviously, you guys are wireless, you know, focused, but yeah, just curious what your thoughts are on their announcement recently, and also, you know, Dabba being a SubDAO versus its own project.
Yeah, I think for the recent announcement, I think it's awesome. I also know the folks at Sourceful, and I hope it goes really well. I'm sure it will. I think they're on a good path going forward. As to why not a SubDAO, I wouldn't say no, that we'd sort of close the door on that. It's just, for one, I think even in the conversation that you guys had with Amir and Boris and that sort of thing, I think this is one of those things that regardless of which way you slice it, they're going to be a different set of pros and cons on both sides. But what we realized was, on a very macro level, as we evolved the thinking, and to be clear, the original idea was, yeah, very much, let's just do a Helium SubDAO and sort of take it from there. But as we sort of got into the weeds of how things would work, what we realized was, in the beginning, for us, starting in a more central way and being able to sort of iterate and change and move things around would be better if we didn't have to be tied to either another token or another approval process or governance process and that sort of thing. So I think once we're more nailed down in a lot of ways, it may make absolute sense to sort of revisit that. And I'm broadly in favor with the concept of network of networks. Like, I'll give you a simple notion as to why we'll end up walking down that path. And every project, because of the kind of sort of vertical and horizontal integration when it comes to sensors and connectivity and that sort of thing, your remit is going to expand as your network grows and you become more successful and you want to change the TAM or change revenue. Like, it's a path everyone has to walk. There's going to be a lot of trying and experimentation and sort of partnerships, and it'll work out. I'm not close to the idea. I think it'll just take time, because it turns out for everyone, there's more nuance than everyone originally thought at the beginning. That's all that it is.
Yeah, it sounds like you're hinting at a potential, you know, network of networks move for Dabba in the future. Like, is that around a similar idea to Helium in terms of, you know, you guys are focused on Wi-Fi now, but you might focus on other wireless protocols or networks in the future? Or, you know, what are you thinking?
I'll slice it more clearly. So I'd say take it from what is the best way to term it, or does it have to do with crypto or anything like that? Let's like take an entire step back. And if you look at it from the first principles perspective, Like I mentioned, right now, so what we do is install a broadband connection and a Wi-Fi router in someone's house. The next step that we're going to do is when we finish out our laser is the one layer of backhaul before that, that's the core grid. Now, if I'm going to take the effort and my LCO teams, or that we can talk about later, but our people are going to go and install new connections in new homes, they might as well install a weather sensor there. Or they might as well, right? We've got this entire operations team that we're building out by partnering with a ton of deployers and that sort of thing. We're building that layer zero where it's not like a Helium or a Sourceful or sort of any other DePIN where they depend on existing connectivity being in that location. We're building the connectivity to begin with. So that allows us, for example, room to vertically integrate or horizontally if we sort of felt like it. So we don't know. Let's see. There's a lot of interesting roads because the question is, I mean, on the other hand, another way that sort of shapes our thinking about this is supply versus demand. Traditionally, what I'd call version 1 DePINs is it's been a very supply-led approach of let's build this network. Someone's going to pay for it at some point. Let's hope it works when we hit scale. And maybe that's great. And that's how things should start because it started with crypto sort of picking up and also. Our approach, on the other hand, is we're trying to fill demand. And so we're trying to sort of economically slice what is the maximum we can push that demand to? Because if I've got an incoming customer that's going to pay for something, and every one of our hotspots is paid for monthly by the subscriber, we use that revenue to burn, and I'll come to all of those things. But so network of networks, that concept itself is going to evolve over time. But 100% it's a roadmap of anyone looking at things from a long-term sort of scaling perspective.
It's a really interesting point because I think one of the aspects of crypto that people have always praised and found noteworthy about it is that these businesses, networks are often global from day one. Bitcoin is a global network. Ethereum started as a global network. Do you think that's uniquely different for DePIN? I.e., do you think location and geography are a more important organizing principle for DePIN type networks versus maybe more traditional L1 or pure software type networks? And I guess, how do you think about how these DePIN networks will organize long-term? Would be very curious if you think it's going to be significantly location dependent, because you made an interesting point there, which is that the ability to, deploy several networks on one location could be a very strong part of, how a network like yours accrues a huge amount of value over time. So maybe to take a step back, I'd be very curious what you think about the location and geography point as an organizing principle and how that maybe differs from the rest of crypto, which, is uniquely and inherently always global.
I think you stated it really well at the beginning, the first sentence that you made. And I think it rhymes nicely with what Helium's journey was. And I'll bet you in the long run, either them or us or somebody, there'll be a lot of TikTok in this is, I think DePIN and these sorts of things will merge with L1s per se at some point. Like Helium did its own blockchain and then moved to Solana. Solana is doing the Solana phone. There's going to be a Solana phone number 2. If we're going to aggregate or build other sensors or deploy other things, we'll have to have a layer somewhere in there. So there's going to be this fungible thing where L1s and infrastructure, they sort of very tightly go hand in hand. So you'll see one starting to become like the other, both in a sort of long-term race, is what my belief is.
And you mentioned a bit on the supply side, but looking at your Explorer online, looks like you're at about 1,500 hotspots deployed, and you've got 2 service providers, which I thought was interesting. So there's already kind of 2 larger groups, like one of which is you all, and the other is Swami Wi-Fi. Is the supply side permissionless in the sense that anyone can buy your roughly $200 Wi-Fi Dabba, Wi-Fi hotspot and deploy it? And also, how do you think about expanding to other cities beyond the 2 that you're in now?
For sure. So the way that it works is the person who buys the hotspot is different from the person that deploys the hotspot. That's what we're decoupling here. So you purchase the hotspot and you select, do you want Swami Wi-Fi or do you want Wi-Fi Dabba to install it for you? So one of us will install it at the next new broadband customer that we have. So we're decoupling that ownership. So for example, the average person that's purchased hotspots on our network has bought at least 6 or 7, I think is what we're averaging. There are a couple of people that have bought like 200-300 as well, and that sort of thing. So it's permissionless from the sense that anyone can buy a hotspot. it's permissioned right now with the service providers that we onboard. There are 150,000 service providers in India, and we're going to aggregate all of them. So the two are a very small start. You'll see dozens, if not hundreds more come online over the course of the next year. The cities that we've rolled out in, so Swami Wi-Fi serves Pune and Islampur, a small town. We're in Bangalore. So as we onboard different service providers, more cities across the country will come online. You will see at least somewhere between 30 to 50 cities on our network, roughly by the end of the year-ish, something like that. So to go back to that sort of unique snowflake, what makes India very interesting is on the broadband side, if you slice up the 30 million connections that are there, 10 million are government copper old lines. They're called broadband, but they're nowhere near that. About 10 million is with telco 1, and another 10 million is with telco 2. Now, what's really interesting is the remaining 2-3 million connections are small service providers. So think roughly young male, mid-20s to early 40s, somewhat technology savvy, used to have a satellite dish pointed at the sky, and then had a bunch of cables going to 100 subscribers that he ran as an informal cable TV business, and probably has a small real estate business on the side or sells small electronics in a shop, that sort of thing. That person is migrating to become an internet service provider because his entire audience has switched to watching Hotstar, Netflix, Prime Video, that sort of thing. So there are 150,000 of them, all in the local cable operators association, right? So they're all legit people who are used to paying for hardware, equipment, deploying the rest of it. What they don't have is the capability to modernize and expand their networks, because the cost of each additional connection costs him money. And because he's a small guy, his revenue is so small, his final profit at the end of the day, for him to expand his network is a thing. And because we're still largely unbanked and informal and the rest of that, there's no way this dude can get a loan to expand that business. So when you buy your hotspot, you're just subsidizing the growth of his network at the end of the day. And the reason that we want to do it this way is, one, you get nationwide coverage immediately. Number two, man, we're doing exactly what Uber, Airbnb, DoorDash, and everyone has done, which is aggregate this market, provide them a layer of technology, provide them a layer of DeFi, and help them scale this. And by doing that, you will be able to grow a singular network faster than any single telco can. And there's a level of quality maintained over here because all of these people have been in business for the last couple of years and have stable customers and that sort of thing. So we're creating a sort of competitive marketplace where you as the hotspot owner gets all of the rewards. You choose your provider and then you reward them monthly based on their performance. If they suck, you move your hotspot to someone else. And so even the market should get more competitive, customers get better service, scale the network, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to at least allow for the decoupling of hotspot owner and hotspot deployer, especially when you're focused in one country or geography to start with, right? I thought it was interesting. There was a chart on your Explorer that showed like obviously where the hotspots are deployed, which is all in India, but also the location or the rough location of the owners of those hotspots. And that's a global map. There's people in the US, there's people in Europe that are buying and financing the hotspots that are then deployed by experts in areas of India where there's like a lot of demand. So I think that model makes sense. I think more Deepin should allow for kind of basically like foreign investment or decoupling hotspot owner and hotspot deployer. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Moving to demand side a bit, same Explorer shows 830 terabytes of data and 40K of revenue since February. So I think you've talked a bit about kind of how an end user would sign up, right? It's like you're basically selling broadband connections to like retail shops, cafes, restaurants.
Homes, offices, everybody, everything. Like think of it this way, again, pure first principles perspective. Every physical structure needs connectivity. And once you install that connectivity and there's someone there to maintain it, it will be there for the next 50 years. So our goal is really, if there's a physical structure, we're going to put a radio there.
That makes sense. And it's Wi-Fi, obviously, right? So you don't need a SIM card. You don't need to sell a mobile plan. It's very kind of seamless for the end user with like a cell phone to connect.
And roaming in public, right? So anywhere you go in the city, you're just going to continue having access.
How does your offering compare in terms of like price and functionality, maybe coverage to other more popular options in India? Like what is the default kind of cellular or Wi-Fi option for a consumer in India today? And then how do you guys compare?
Yeah, so there's a massive competitive advantage we're bringing to the table, because you have to think of existing. So telcos are sort of running basically a oversubscription, rent-seeking, almost gym subscription type model, right? They've got only so much bandwidth, and they sort of resell multiples of that, but it's very expensive to set up that network. So therefore, it's expensive for the customer. Because the cost of the network is being subsidized by the hotspot owners, we're able to offer a faster internet connection at almost a quarter of the price that the best telco can afford right now. That's one. The second is, in most of the places that we are rolling out and expanding, there is no alternative for the people, or there is no connectivity for those people at all. So you're bringing fresh connectivity to it. I think a solid 40% of our customers, first time they're connecting with Wi-Fi, right? It's that level of connectivity that we're sort of bringing. Everyone's used to 4G, 5G. They're super comfy, but they don't know what the Wi-Fi icon does, because where in your home or your office for them in their daily life do they ever get that? So because we don't come with that initial $30 billion that it took to build the network, we don't charge an installation cost. We're able to give higher bandwidth, higher cap speeds, things along those lines, literally about a quarter of the price of everybody else, and in areas that they cannot serve. And just to cap that off, even in the major cities, our office is in about one of the most central locations you could probably have in Bangalore. If anyone from Bangalore is listening, we're at Sony Signal. They know what we're talking about. We can't get all three major telcos to provide us a broadband connection to this office, because no telco has more than 30 or 40% coverage in a city or a locality, because they don't have the permission to dig the roads and that sort of thing. So they don't have their infrastructure, right? There's a sort of political divide where telco A can cover this area, telco B can cover that area. But again, because we're aggregating all the small people who have local relationships and it's their hood, we get coverage everywhere.
Yeah, I think it's like the power of the Deepin model, right? Like leveraging a community's assets in terms of human relationships, real estate, access, capital, kind of all those things. So yeah, that sounds great. Moving to tokenomics real quick. What can you tell us about the token? I know you said it's coming up in the next maybe couple months. From a brief kind of look online, it looks like the tokenomics are pretty similar to a lot of other Deepin projects or Helium, in the sense that there's kind of like a buy and burn mechanic for data transfer usage. But yeah, curious, just high level overview, how you see the token working or how you're thinking about it. Any notable differences from kind of the Deepin norms we've seen today? And then if you have any idea when the TGE would be, we'd love to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a high amount of utility in our token. So our token not only is burnt when data is consumed as proof of data consumption, but for example, it's also burnt when a local cable operator installs the hotspot at someone's house as proof of having done that physical work. The other thing that's incredibly important is, unlike, say, for example, in other projects where a location owner may get a share, somebody providing bandwidth may get a share, another party may get a share, in our model, you, the hotspot owner, get all of the tokens on a regular fixed supply. You then reward the other people in the network for their services using these tokens. So that's sort of one thing where hotspots owners firmly have power across the network. And that sort of solidifies the utility of it, because you are using that token as a form of reward for the ISP maintaining that location for you, and you're doing it on a regular basis. And there are other things that we'll bring to the table along with that. Coming to the TGE, in the next month or so, we'll be launching on Solana. We'll be launching on our DEX. We just did our introduction post on Jupiter's Launchpad. So if anyone's a Jupe holder or is interested in Jupe, please check out the Jupe LFG and see our proposal there.
That's awesome. We're really excited about both the TG and obviously the next couple of years of what we see you guys build. The last thing we want to do here, if it's good with you, is we want to do a quick lightning round where maybe we give you a word or a phrase and you give us the first thought that comes to your head. Maybe we do 4 to 5 of these, and then from there, you can give us some information just on where we can find you and such. So if that's cool, let's dive into it. First one is GeoMobile.
Okay, first things first, editor person, this is where your work comes into play. So, market opener.
Helium Mobile.
Oh, amazing pioneer.
Human organs.
The most precious thing you'll ever need.
Kamala Harris.
don't know much.
Neither does she. Pudgy penguins.
Oh, soft and fluffy.
Awesome. Where can people find you?
The best place is dabba.com. Everything's linked over there, or dabba.network to check out our Explorer. But please, please, please help support us on the Jupe Launchpad. So definitely search for Jupe Research Introductions, and you'll find our Launchpad intro over there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for a great episode here. We're super excited to see what you guys do, obviously, in the short term and the long term. And congrats on a long road to get to where you are today, but it seems like acceleration ahead.
For sure. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for listening to the Proof of Coverage podcast. We'll be posting one new episode a week on Mondays, interviewing the best DePIN and crypto founders out there. If you like this episode, please follow us on Twitter or X at CoverageProved or on any major podcasting platform. Thank you.